3 weeks before my wedding. The man I believed I would spend the rest of my life with placed a stack of papers on the table between us and quietly said, "I think we should sign this before we get married." I looked down, expecting guest lists, venue contracts, or perhaps another expense sheet for the ceremony we had spent months planning together. Instead, I saw 2 words printed across the top of the first page: prenuptial agreement. In that moment, everything around me seemed to fade away. Just hours earlier, we had been discussing honeymoon destinations and laughing about growing old together. Now, the man who had promised me forever was asking me to sign a legal document designed to protect the $7 million he had spent decades building. He looked nervous, but he also looked certain. "I just want to protect what I've built," he told me. $7 million, a fortune most people could only dream of accumulating in a lifetime. He believed he was being responsible. He believed he was making the smartest decision possible. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that the woman sitting across from him had quietly built a fortune worth more than $350 million. And for nearly 2 years, I had never told him. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The United States of America, Canada, England, Lagos, Nigeria. We'd love to hear from you. That's because every comment means a lot to us. And if you are new here, this is Family Roots Stories. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for real. Hit the subscribe. It won't take you a second, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Without wasting much time, let's continue. The truth is, I had spent most of my adult life hiding in plain sight. People assume wealth announces itself. They imagine private jets, diamond necklaces, and headlines in business magazines. But real wealth often moves quietly. According to numerous studies on affluent Americans and family wealth preservation, many high net worth individuals intentionally live far below their means, partly to maintain privacy and partly to protect themselves from opportunistic relationships. I understood that reality all too well. Years earlier, after building and eventually selling a healthcare technology company for hundreds of millions of dollars, I learned a painful lesson. The moment people discovered how much money I had, everything changed. Conversations changed. Intentions changed. Relationships changed. I stopped knowing whether people loved me, respected me, or simply saw me as an opportunity. By the time I met Daniel Brooks, I had already decided that any future relationship would begin without my financial status being part of the equation. I wanted to know if someone could truly love me before they ever learned what sat in my investment accounts. Daniel seemed different from the very beginning. At 58 years old, he was successful in his own right. He had spent decades building a respected real estate development business in Colorado and had accumulated an estimated net worth of around $7 million. He was hardworking, disciplined, and deeply proud of everything he had earned. More importantly, he treated me with kindness during a period when I had nearly given up on love entirely. We met at a charity fundraiser, and unlike everyone else in the room, Daniel never asked what I did for a living, never tried to impress me with extravagant stories, and never appeared interested in anything beyond simply getting to know me. Over time, I lowered my guard. I introduced him to my children. He introduced me to his. We celebrated birthdays together, spent holidays together, and slowly began building a future that felt genuine. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine growing old beside someone again. But as our relationship became more serious, small moments began to stand out. Daniel often spoke about friends who had lost significant assets during divorce proceedings. He frequently emphasized the importance of protecting what a person had worked their entire life to build. At the time, I dismissed those comments. I believe they reflected experience, not suspicion. Looking back now, I often wonder whether those conversations were early signs of what was coming. Then came the proposal. It happened during a family gathering surrounded by children, grandchildren, laughter, and tears. It felt perfect. Everyone celebrated. Wedding plans immediately began. Venues were reserved. Invitations were designed. Our families blended effortlessly. And for several months, life seemed exactly as I had always hoped it could be. Then, only 3 weeks before the wedding, Daniel asked if we could have dinner alone, because there was something important he wanted to discuss. I remember thinking he seemed unusually tense that evening. After dinner, he reached into his briefcase and slid the documents across the table. "I hope you understand," he said softly. "I've worked too hard to lose everything if something ever goes wrong." I stared at the papers without saying a word. In that moment, countless emotions collided inside me. Was this simply financial caution? Was it fear shaped by past experiences? Or was this the moment I finally discovered that money had always been part of the relationship after all? I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I quietly closed the folder, looked across the table at the man I loved, and realized that the secret I had protected for years could no longer remain hidden. Before we keep going deeper on this story, a quick reminder: if you have not subscribed and please do so. That's because it will help other people discover the channel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened after Daniel handed me that prenup would force both of us to confront truths neither of us was prepared to face. One secret had already shaped our entire relationship. Another revelation was about to change everything. As I sat across from Daniel that evening, staring at the prenup agreement resting quietly between us, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment every relationship eventually reaches. The moment when love collides with fear. Daniel wasn't a poor man. Far from it. Over decades, he had built a successful real estate business, earned the respect of his peers, and accumulated wealth that most Americans would consider life-changing. $7 million represented a lifetime of sacrifice, long nights, failed projects, risks, and perseverance. I understood that because I had walked a similar path myself. But what troubled me wasn't the document itself. Financial experts frequently recommend prenuptial agreements, especially later in life when both partners bring significant assets into a marriage. In fact, family attorneys across the United States report that prenups have become increasingly common among couples over 50. What troubled me was something else entirely. Why had Daniel waited until 3 weeks before the wedding? Why had he never mentioned it during the many conversations we had about our future? And perhaps most importantly, would his feelings change once he learned the truth about me? I had spent nearly 2 years carefully guarding a secret that shaped every major decision in my life. Now, I faced a choice that could either strengthen our relationship or destroy it forever. The questions kept growing. Had Daniel truly fallen in love with me without regard for money? Had my secrecy been fair to him? And if I revealed my actual financial position, would he still be the same man I thought I knew? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Before our wedding day arrived, every hidden truth would come into the light. To understand what happened next, you first need to understand who I was before Daniel entered my life. 20 years earlier, I was a married mother of two trying to keep a small healthcare software company alive. The business began in a spare bedroom with borrowed money, outdated computers, and more determination than experience. There were months when payroll barely cleared and years when failure seemed almost guaranteed. Yet slowly, almost unexpectedly, the company grew. Hospitals adopted our technology. Investors arrived. Expansion followed. What started as a small regional operation eventually became a nationally recognized healthcare platform serving millions of patients across the country. When the company was acquired, the transaction transformed my life overnight. People often assume wealth solves every problem. It doesn't. It simply changes the nature of those problems. Friends suddenly expected financial assistance. Distant relatives reappeared. Strangers treated me differently. Even my marriage suffered. My first husband and I had built the company together, but success magnified issues we had ignored for years. The divorce was painful, public, and emotionally exhausting. Although our settlement was fair, the experience left scars that never completely healed. Afterward, I made a promise to myself. If I ever found love again, it would be based on who I was, not what I owned. For nearly 8 years, I remained single. I dedicated myself to philanthropy, served on nonprofit boards, traveled extensively, and quietly managed my investments. Publicly, I maintained a modest lifestyle. I lived comfortably but simply. Most people assumed I was financially secure, but few imagined the true scale of my wealth. Then I met Daniel Brooks. Daniel was warm, confident, and refreshingly grounded. He had built his real estate company from the ground up after leaving corporate America in his 30s. He had endured recessions, market crashes, failed developments, and personal setbacks. By the time we met, he was financially successful and widely respected in his community. He loved fishing, adored his grandchildren, and possessed an easy sense of humor that immediately put people at ease. Our relationship developed naturally. We started with coffee. Coffee became dinners. Dinners became weekend trips. Soon, we were spending holidays together and discussing retirement dreams. Daniel often spoke about building a lake house where our combined families could gather every summer. Listening to him describe that future made me believe I had finally found someone who wanted partnership more than anything else. Still, there were moments that gave me pause. Whenever stories about celebrity divorces appeared in the news, Daniel would comment on how unfair divorce settlements could be. He frequently mentioned friends who had lost everything after failed marriages. He wasn't bitter, but he was cautious. Looking back, I realized those conversations were quietly preparing both of us for a conflict neither of us saw coming. The engagement happened on a crisp autumn evening surrounded by family. Daniel proposed during a gathering at his daughter's home. There were tears, applause, photographs, and heartfelt toasts. It felt genuine. It felt right. Wedding planning began immediately. We chose a venue, finalized a guest list, and started discussing the details of our future together. For months, everything seemed perfect. Then, 3 weeks before the ceremony, Daniel requested a private dinner. At first, the conversation felt ordinary. We discussed seating arrangements, catering updates, and honeymoon possibilities. Then his expression changed. "I've been thinking about something important," he said. He reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table. "I think we should sign a prenup." Silence followed. Daniel explained that he had worked his entire life to build his business and wanted to protect what he had earned. He insisted the request wasn't about distrust. It was about responsibility. Part of me understood completely. Another part felt unexpectedly hurt, not because of the prenup itself, but because of what it represented. We had shared countless intimate conversations, yet somehow the subject had remained hidden until the final weeks before our wedding. I asked for time to think. Daniel agreed, but as I drove home that evening, I realized the conversation had triggered something much larger than a legal discussion. It forced me to confront the secret I had deliberately concealed from the man I intended to marry. The days following that dinner were emotionally exhausting. I consulted attorneys, financial advisors, and a close friend who had known me for decades. Their opinions varied dramatically. Some advised me to postpone the wedding immediately. Others argued that Daniel's request was entirely reasonable. One advisor asked a question that stayed with me. "Are you upset about the prenup?" he said. "Or are you upset because his request forces you to reveal the truth?" The question unsettled me because I knew the answer. The truth was, I had been conducting my own test from the very beginning. I wanted to know whether someone could love me without the influence of extraordinary wealth. Daniel had passed that test for nearly 2 years. Yet now, with a single document, the entire relationship felt uncertain. Meanwhile, Daniel sensed my distance. He called frequently. He reassured me repeatedly. He emphasized that the prenup wasn't about greed. "I love you," he said. "I just need peace of mind." The sincerity in his voice made my decision even harder, because despite everything, I still loved him deeply. A week later, I invited Daniel to my home. He arrived expecting another difficult conversation about the prenup. Instead, I handed him a folder. "Before we discuss your agreement," I said, "there's something you need to know." Inside the folder were financial statements, trust documents, investment summaries, and legal disclosures. At first, Daniel looked confused. Then he began reading. Minutes passed. He reread the figures several times. Finally, he looked up. $350 million. He asked quietly. I nodded. The room fell silent. I explained everything. The company, the acquisition, the investments, the years spent hiding my wealth, the painful lessons from my first marriage, and the promise I had made to myself, never again to reveal my financial position. Early in a relationship, Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, tears filled his eyes. You never trusted me, he said softly. His words struck harder than I expected, because he was right. Although my intentions had been understandable, secrecy carries consequences. In protecting myself, I had unknowingly created a different kind of barrier. What happened next surprised me. Daniel slid his own prenup agreement back across the table. I don't want this version anymore, he said. Then he told me something I had never fully understood. Years earlier, his previous marriage had ended after an exceptionally difficult divorce. Although the settlement had been legally fair, the emotional impact had stayed with him for decades. The experience left him fearful, cautious, and deeply protective of the life he had rebuilt afterward. The prenup was never about your money, he explained. I didn't even know you had any. It was about my fare. For the first time, we both realized we had spent our entire relationship protecting ourselves from old wounds. Neither of us had entered the relationship with malicious intentions. We had simply carried unresolved pain. Over the following weeks, we worked together with attorneys to create a completely new agreement. This agreement protected both of us equally. More importantly, it reflected partnership rather than fear. The process forced difficult conversations about trust, honesty, inheritance, family expectations, and vulnerability. Some discussions lasted hours, others ended in tears, yet each conversation brought us closer. Eventually, we recognized something important. Trust is not established through the absence of legal agreements. Trust is established through honesty, and honesty had been missing on both sides. 6 weeks later, surrounded by family and friends, Daniel and I were married. There were no dramatic objections, no last-minute cancellations, no public scandals. But there was something far more meaningful. There was understanding. As we exchanged vows, I realized that marriage is not simply the union of two people. It is the union of their histories, fears, mistakes, hopes, and scars. Neither of us entered that marriage as perfect individuals. We entered as imperfect people willing to tell the truth. Looking back, I often wonder what would have happened if Daniel had never requested that prenup. Would I have eventually revealed my fortune? Would our marriage have survived the secrecy? Would we ever have confronted the fears both of us carried for so many years? We'll never know. What I do know is this: money doesn't create trust, and it doesn't destroy trust either. Secrets, fear, and unresolved pain often do far more damage than dollars ever could. Daniel believed he was protecting $7 million. I believed I was protecting $350 million. In reality, we were both trying to protect our hearts. But what do you think? Was Daniel wrong for asking for a prenup? Was I wrong for hiding my fortune? Or were we both justified based on our past experiences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because the next story may change the way you look at relationships forever.